When my husband gave our daughter's surgery fund to his ex-girlfriend, he did not tell me before he moved the money. He did not tell me after he moved it either. I found out 18 days before our 10-year-old daughter was scheduled for heart surgery when I logged into the savings account to pay for the apartment we had rented near the hospital. The balance should have been $86,240. It was $1,913. At first, I thought I had opened the wrong account. I refreshed the screen. I logged out and signed back in. Then I saw 3 transfers made over 6 days to a company called LTT Hospitality Group. The largest transfer was $47,000. The second was $26,500. The third was $10,827. LTT Hospitality Group belonged to Lauren Tate. Lauren was my husband's former girlfriend. I called him at work and asked one question: "Where is Emma's money?" There was a long silence. Then my husband Scott said, "I was going to put it back before you noticed." That should have been the worst sentence I heard that day. It was not. 2 hours later, a loan officer called and asked why I wanted to dispute a $140,000 home equity line I had supposedly signed 6 weeks earlier. My name was on the application. My signature was on the closing documents. I had never seen any of them. My name is Megan Ellis. I was 37 when this happened. I worked as a senior project manager for a construction company in Columbus, Ohio. My husband Scott was 39 and worked as a financial advisor for a regional wealth management firm. We had been married for 12 years. Our daughter Emma was born with a congenital heart defect called tetralogy of Fallot. She had her first surgery when she was 6 months old and another when she was 4. The operation scheduled that year was not a surprise. Her doctors had told us for a long time that she would probably need a pulmonary valve replacement before adolescence. We planned for it carefully. Our health insurance would cover most of the hospital treatment, but not everything. The surgeon Emma needed was in Cleveland. We expected deductibles, out-of-network imaging, travel, an apartment near the hospital, physical therapy, meals, and several weeks when one of us might not be able to work. For 5 years, we put money into a separate high-yield savings account every month. I skipped vacations. Scott delayed buying a new car. We sold a small piece of land my father had left me and deposited the money there. Emma knew we had a heart account, but she did not know the amount. She liked to joke that when the surgery was over, she wanted us to spend whatever remained on the largest chocolate cake in Ohio. The account was not only money, it was every fear I had turned into a plan. When Scott emptied it, he did not simply take savings. He took the one thing that had allowed me to sleep during the months before our daughter's operation. Lauren Tate owned a restaurant called Laurel House. It had exposed brick walls, expensive cocktails, and a waiting list on Friday nights. Scott had dated Lauren in college and for several years afterward. They did not end badly. Lauren wanted to open a restaurant. Scott wanted a stable job and a family. They went in different directions and remained friends. When Scott was 28, he made a serious mistake at his first financial firm. He approved a client allocation without completing a required compliance review. The loss was not enormous, but the violation could have ended his career before it started. Lauren's uncle was a partner at the firm. Lauren persuaded him to let Scott resign quietly instead of reporting the incident as intentional misconduct. She also hired Scott to manage the finances for her first small restaurant while he searched for another job. Scott believed Lauren had saved his career. Maybe she had. When he told me about it early in our relationship, I respected his gratitude. Lauren had helped him during one of the worst periods of his life. I understood why he did not want to abandon her when she needed advice. At first, her requests were ordinary. Could Scott review a lease? Could he explain a tax notice? Could he recommend someone who handled employee retirement plans? He always said yes. Then the requests became larger. Lauren opened a second location and asked Scott to invest. I said no. We had Emma's medical expenses and a mortgage. Scott agreed with me, but he still helped Lauren prepare the investor presentation for free. When Emma was 8, Lauren's bookkeeper quit during an audit. Scott spent nearly every evening at Laurel House for 3 weeks. I handled school, medication, cardiology appointments, dinner, and bedtime alone. On the night of Emma's school talent show, Lauren called because a supplier had threatened to stop deliveries. Scott left before Emma played the piano. He came home after midnight and said, "Thanks for understanding." That sentence was familiar in our marriage. Thanks for understanding why Lauren needs help with payroll. Thanks for understanding why I took her call during dinner. Thanks for understanding why we cannot use the airline miles this year. Lauren needs me at the restaurant opening. Thanks for understanding why you handle the medical paperwork. You're better at details. I was better at details. I was also better at carrying disappointment without making it visible. Scott liked to tell people I was the calm one in our family. He meant it as praise. If Emma had a cardiology appointment, I prepared the questions. If insurance denied a claim, I appealed it. If Scott was overwhelmed at work, I rearranged my schedule. I thought this was partnership. I did not notice that my reliability had slowly become one more asset Scott believed he could spend. The day I discovered the missing money, I was sitting at our kitchen island. Emma was at school. A folder from the hospital was open beside me with instructions for medication, arrival time, and preoperative testing. When Scott said he planned to replace the money before I noticed, I felt something inside me become very still. Replace it with what? I asked. Lauren has an investor closing next week. The restaurant had a short-term cash problem. You transferred $84,000. It's a bridge loan from our daughter's surgery account. The surgery is mostly covered by insurance. I looked at the hospital estimate in front of me. You know what that money is for? And I know we won't need all of it on the first day. Lauren has 32 employees who could lose their jobs. There are moments in a marriage when a person reveals the private mathematics they have been using to measure your life. 32 employees counted. Lauren's restaurant counted. The investor closing counted. My fear did not. Emma's recovery became flexible because I had always found a way to handle things. I said, put it back today. Scott lowered his voice. Megan, if I pull it now, Laurel House may miss payroll. Just give me 7 days. No, you don't understand the situation. I understand exactly which account you used. He exhaled sharply. This is why I didn't tell you first. You would have reacted emotionally. That sentence ended the call. For 12 years, Scott had described me as calm, rational, and practical. The first time my answer threatened what he wanted, my reaction became emotional. I called the bank. The representative froze the savings account and opened a fraud review. Because the transfers came from a joint account and Scott was an owner. The bank warned me that recovering the money might be complicated. Then she asked whether I also wanted to discuss the home equity line. I thought she had the wrong customer. What home equity line? There was a pause. The line opened on May 6th. Current balance is $138,400. I stopped breathing for a second. The loan had been approved online. The funds went to an account held by LTT Hospitality Group. The application included my social security number, a scan of my driver's license, and electronic signatures indicating both homeowners had consented. I had not consented. I had not received the emails because the contact address on my portion of the application was one letter different from mine. The loan officer said, Mrs. Ellis, are you telling me you did not sign these documents? I'm telling you I did not know this loan existed until 30 seconds ago. She transferred me to the fraud department. I called my older sister, Nicole. She was a family law attorney in Cincinnati. I did not start by saying I wanted a divorce. I said I need to know how to stop Scott from moving anything else. Nicole asked me to repeat everything slowly. Then she said, take Emma and the documents you need. Go somewhere he cannot access tonight. Do you think he would hurt us? Financial harm is already harm. We do not wait to see what category comes next. That sentence stayed with me. I picked Emma up from school and told her we were sleeping at Aunt Nicole's for a few nights. I packed medication, medical records, clothes, my laptop, passports, tax returns, and the folder containing the hospital instructions. Scott arrived home while I was loading the car. What are you doing? Leaving until I understand what you signed in my name. His face changed. The line of credit is temporary. That wasn't my question. Did you sign my name? I used the online authorization because we had already discussed helping Lauren. We discussed investing 2 years ago. I said no. This is different. Yes. This time you decided my no had expired. Emma came out carrying her backpack. Scott immediately softened his voice. Sweetheart, Mom and I are working something out. I looked at him. Do not make her responsible for making this feel normal. He stepped back. We left. That night Lauren called me 11 times. I did not answer. The 12th contact was a text. Scott is trying to save 32 families. Please don't destroy the restaurant because you're angry. I read it twice, then I wrote back. Did you know the money came from Emma's surgery account? The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Lauren answered. Scott said it was family savings. I asked another question. Did you know my name was used on the home equity loan? She did not respond. The next morning, Nicole helped me place a credit freeze, notify the mortgage lender, preserve our account records, and file a police report regarding the signature. I felt sick doing it. The officer asked whether I was sure I wanted to report my husband. I said I'm sure I want an accurate record of what happened. Scott came to Nicole's office that afternoon. He looked as if he had not slept. You called the police. Someone used my identity to borrow $140,000. I'm your husband. That does not make my signature community property. He sat down and put his head in his hands. The restaurant was about to fail. Lauren had a tax payment, payroll, and a landlord threatening eviction. An investor committed $250,000. We only needed to cover the gap. Why did the loan require my name? Because the house is jointly titled? Why didn't you ask me? He was silent. Say it, I told him. You would have said no. So you knew my answer. You just removed my ability to give it. He began crying. Lauren kept me from losing my career. I could not watch everything she built disappear when I had a way to help. You did not have a way to help. You had access to my identity and Emma's money. I was going to repay it. With money from an investor you had never met? Lauren showed me the commitment letter. Did you verify it? He looked away. Scott taught clients to verify investments. He warned people not to risk emergency savings. He told retirees that urgency was a pressure tactic and that any legitimate deal would survive careful questions. When Lauren needed him, he ignored every rule he sold professionally. The investor did not close the following week. There was no investor. The commitment letter came from a small private funding company that had never approved the deal. Lauren had submitted an application and treated a preliminary expression of interest as guaranteed money. That was only the beginning. The bank's fraud review uncovered that Laurel House had been operating with unpaid sales taxes for nearly a year. Lauren had used part of our savings to cover old payroll checks and part to repay a private loan from another friend. Nearly $20,000 went to a personal credit card that included hotel charges, designer clothing, and a trip to Napa she had described online as a supplier meeting. Lauren had not built one criminal master plan. The truth was more ordinary and in some ways more dangerous. Her business had begun failing. She hid one problem, borrowed to cover another, and kept believing the next busy month or next investor would repair everything. Each lie made the next lie feel necessary. Scott saw enough warning signs to know better. He chose not to look closely because looking closely might have required him to tell Lauren no. He had once lost a job because he approved something without completing the required review. Lauren had protected him from that consequence. 12 years later, he repeated the same choice on a much larger scale while telling himself he was repaying her kindness. The symmetry would have been almost poetic if our daughter's future had not been sitting in the middle of it. Emma knew something was wrong. We had not told her about the missing money. But children notice the temperature of a room even when adults hide the fire. One evening at Nicole's house, she asked, "Are we still going to Cleveland?" "Yes." "Do we still have the apartment?" "I had not paid the deposit. We're working on a different place." She looked at me carefully. "Is Dad coming?" I wanted to say yes because that was the answer she wanted. Instead, I said I don't know yet. She nodded and looked down at the scar running along the center of her chest. "I don't want you to be scared by yourself." I held her so tightly she complained that I was crushing her. The next day, I called the hospital's financial counselor. I was ashamed. I had managed projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I had spent 5 years planning for this surgery. Telling a stranger that the money was gone felt like confessing a personal failure. The counselor did not treat me that way. She helped separate what insurance would cover from what we had assumed we needed up front. She connected me with a furnished housing program for families of pediatric patients, my employer-approved paid medical leave I had not realized was available. A local congenital heart charity covered part of our travel. We still faced expenses. I sold a small investment account and arranged a payment plan. Emma's surgery was never going to be canceled because of the missing savings. Hospitals do not simply abandon a child in need of cardiac care because a parent cannot produce a private reserve account. But Scott had taken our margin of safety. He had turned a planned recovery into a financial emergency 18 days before our daughter entered an operating room. That mattered. Scott asked to come to the hospital. I agreed because Emma wanted him there. I made one condition clear: the surgery was not a stage for repairing our marriage. The morning of the operation, we sat on opposite sides of Emma's bed while a nurse explained what would happen. Emma squeezed both of our hands. Scott cried when they rolled her away. So did I. For 6 hours we waited in the same family room and barely spoke. At one point Scott said, "I know you think I chose Lauren over Emma." I looked at him. "I don't think it." I saw the bank statements. "I never believed the surgery was in danger." "You believed I would solve whatever happened next." He did not deny it. "You knew I would call the hospital. You knew I would find housing, fight with insurance, sell something, borrow something, miss work and hold Emma together. You counted my ability as part of the money you gave Lauren." Scott covered his face. "I didn't see it that way. That does not mean it wasn't what you did." The surgeon came out shortly after 4 in the afternoon. The operation had gone well. Emma's new valve was working. Her heart rhythm was stable. We could see her soon. Scott and I both stood at once. For a moment, relief erased everything else. He hugged me, and I let him. That hug was real. So was the fact that I no longer wanted to go home with him. People sometimes believe a family crisis should put smaller conflicts into perspective. Emma's surgery did put something into perspective for me. It showed me that Scott and I could still love the same child completely while no longer being safe partners for each other. The fraud investigation continued during Emma's recovery. Electronic records showed the loan application had been completed from Scott's office laptop. The false email address had been created from his phone. The signature was generated by tracing one from an old refinancing document. Lauren had emailed him my driver's licenses scan from a folder of documents I had once provided when Laurel House catered a corporate event for my company. She claimed she did not know he would use it for a loan. Messages between them made that difficult to believe. One message from Lauren said, "She'll be furious if she finds out before the investor money comes in," Scott replied. "Then she can't find out before that." That message ended any remaining uncertainty I had. This was not one impulsive transfer made during a desperate phone call. It was a plan built around my ignorance. The bank did not erase the home equity line immediately. Fraud is not corrected by one phone call, even when the person whose signature was copied is telling the truth. The lender placed the account on hold, but the lien remained attached to our house while investigators reviewed the application. For nearly 3 months, I did not know whether the home where Emma had grown up would become part of the repayment fight. I had to provide handwriting samples, old closing documents, phone records, work calendars, and proof that I had been at a construction meeting when the electronic closing supposedly occurred. The lender's records showed that a verification code had been sent to the false email address. The final identity question had been answered with information from our joint tax return. Scott knew every answer because marriage had given him access to the facts of my life. The fraud investigator asked me, "Did you ever give your husband permission to sign routine financial documents for you?" "No." "Did he believe he had that permission?" I thought about the question. He believed he would receive forgiveness after the money came back. That is not the same as permission. The investigator nodded and wrote it down. Scott's mother requested a family meeting before Emma's surgery. She came to Nicole's office carrying a folder of printed restaurant reviews, photographs of Laurel House employees, and an article about how small businesses supported local families. She spread them across the table. "These are real people," she said. Scott was trying to stop all of them from losing their income. I placed Emma's hospital estimate beside the photographs. "She is a real person, too." "No one is saying she isn't. Then why is her security the only resource everyone thinks was available?" My mother-in-law said Scott had believed the investor money was certain. She compared the transfer to moving money between family accounts for a few days. Nicole interrupted. "It was moved into a business Megan does not own. A separate loan was opened using her identity. Those are not family account transfers." Scott's mother began crying. She asked whether I wanted the father of my child to have a criminal record. I said, "I wanted the father of my child not to create fraudulent debt 18 days before her surgery. I do not control which consequence makes you most uncomfortable." Afterward, I sat in Nicole's empty conference room and shook. Speaking clearly had not made me feel powerful. It made me feel cruel, even though nothing I said was cruel. Years of keeping peace had trained my body to experience a boundary as an attack. Nicole handed me water. "You did fine," she said. "I hate that everyone thinks I'm doing this to punish him. People prefer punishment stories because they make consequences optional. If this is punishment, you can choose to stop. If it is protection, you cannot stop simply because they dislike it." That distinction helped me through the months that followed. Emma overheard more than we realized. One night after surgery, while we were still in Cleveland, she asked why her grandmother kept saying the restaurant had families too. I told her adults had made a money decision she did not need to solve. Was it my heart money? She asked. I could not lie. Yes. She became very quiet. Did Dad give it away because he thought I was going to be okay? He told himself we would have it back before we needed it, but he didn't know. No. Emma looked down at the pulse oxygen monitor on her finger. I don't want him to sell his apartment or anything. Even then, recovering from heart surgery, she was worried that accountability would hurt someone she loved. I said, "Your father is responsible for fixing the problem. You are not responsible for protecting him from feeling bad while he fixes it." That sentence was for both of us. Scott's employer placed him on administrative leave, a financial advisor who used his spouse's identity to obtain credit and directed the money into an undisclosed private business created obvious compliance problems. After an internal review, the firm terminated him. The state licensing board later suspended his advisor registration for 2 years. He was not sent to prison. The prosecutor allowed him to enter a diversion agreement that required restitution, financial crime counseling, community service, and full cooperation in resolving the fraudulent lien. Some people thought that was too little. Others thought I had ruined his career by making the report. My mother-in-law called me and said, "You could have handled this privately." I asked her, "How do you privately remove a loan from a public property record?" She said Scott had made a mistake because he was trying to help someone. "He used my identity," I said. "He is Emma's father. Everything he earns would have gone back to the family. Then he should have protected his ability to earn by not committing fraud." She did not call again for several months. Laurel House closed before the end of the year. Most employees found other jobs. Lauren filed for personal and business bankruptcy. The restaurant's assets were sold, and a portion of the proceeds went toward repaying creditors, including us. We recovered less than half of the savings immediately. Over time, Scott's restitution payments returned more. Lauren sent me a letter through her attorney. She wrote that she had never wanted to harm Emma. She said she had believed the restaurant only needed one final chance. I answered with 2 sentences. "You were allowed to risk your restaurant. You were not allowed to risk my daughter's security." Then I stopped communicating with her. The divorce took almost a year because the debt and property issues were complicated. Scott did not contest custody. He rented a small apartment and found work doing back-office accounting for a manufacturing company, where he had no access to client funds. He began therapy. During mediation, he apologized without mentioning Lauren, her employees, or the investor. He said, "I knew you would say no, so I decided your no was an obstacle instead of an answer." I told myself I was borrowing money, but I was also borrowing your identity and your trust. I had no right to do either. It was the first apology that did not ask me to understand him. I believed he meant it. I still signed the divorce papers. That confused some people. They asked why I would leave if he had admitted what he did and was trying to change. Because an apology can be real without becoming a key that reopens every door. Scott needed to change for himself and for Emma. I did not need to remain married to prove his change mattered. Emma recovered beautifully. 6 months after surgery, she returned to swimming. 1 year later, she ran a charity 1-mile race with her cardiology nurse and complained that the adults were slowing her down. On her 11th birthday, she reminded me about the chocolate cake. "You said whatever was left in the heart account could buy it. There isn't much left in that account." Then a normal cake, but with extra frosting. We bought one from a neighborhood bakery. Scott came to the party. We stood on opposite sides of the table, while Emma blew out the candles. It was not the family picture I had expected when we began saving years earlier. It was still a family. That was another lesson I had to learn. Ending a marriage does not always mean destroying a family. Sometimes it means changing the structure so one person's choices can no longer endanger everyone else. I kept working in construction management. The year after the divorce, I accepted a promotion I had previously declined because it required occasional travel. Scott and I created a schedule for Emma instead of assuming my career would always be the one that bent. The first time I traveled to Denver for 3 days, I felt guilty. Emma said, "Mom, Dad knows my medicine. You wrote it on 3 different pages." She was right. I had spent years making myself indispensable and then resenting that everyone expected me to do everything. Learning to trust appropriate help was part of my recovery, too. Scott became a more careful father. Before spending money on something large for Emma, he asked, If a schedule changed, he told me. He never again used the phrase, "I knew you would understand." Careful co-parenting did not happen immediately. The first year, Scott overcorrected. He asked permission for things that did not require it. Could he buy Emma new running shoes? Could she have pizza on Friday? Could he take her to a movie that ended after 9? I finally told him, I do not want to supervise your entire relationship with her. I want us to agree on decisions that affect health, school, travel, and significant money. Ordinary parenting belongs to the parent who is present, he said. I am afraid of deciding something wrong again. Then ask when the risk is real. Do not make me responsible for every choice so you never have to trust your own judgment. That was a new boundary for me too. After being excluded from a major decision, I wanted control over every minor one. Control felt like safety. It was not. A sustainable family needed defined authority, accurate information, and consequences when agreements were broken. It did not need one frightened person approving every pair of shoes. Emma's cardiologist helped us create a shared medical file. Both parents received appointment notices. Medication changes required confirmation through the hospital portal. Emergency instructions were written clearly enough that neither of us had to rely on memory or on the other person's summary. The structure reduced conflict because it removed opportunities for interpretation. One Saturday, Emma became dizzy during a soccer game at Scott's weekend. He called the cardiology line, followed the protocol, and took her for evaluation. She was dehydrated, not in cardiac distress. He told me only after the nurse had confirmed she was stable. My first reaction was anger that he had waited. Then I read the plan. He had followed it exactly. The parent present handled the immediate assessment and notified the other parent once there was accurate information. I said, "You did the right thing." Scott was quiet for a moment. "Thank you." It was the first time I recognized that rebuilding trust as parents did not mean rebuilding trust as spouses. We could create one functional relationship without pretending the previous one had survived. One evening, 2 years after the divorce, he dropped Emma off after a weekend visit. He handed me an envelope containing the final restitution payment from the restaurant assets. "This doesn't fix it," he said. "No, I know." He started walking away, then turned back. Lauren did help me years ago. I kept thinking that meant I had to rescue her business. Therapy made me ask why. I think if her restaurant failed, then the person who saved my career would become someone I couldn't save. I did not want to feel that powerless. I listened. "So you made me powerless instead," I said. He nodded. Yes. There was nothing else to say. I never regretted reporting the loan. For a long time, I did regret not seeing the pattern earlier. Then I stopped blaming myself for trusting my husband not to use my social security number against me. Trust is not stupidity. The person who violates it is responsible for the violation. But I did examine the smaller choices I had normalized. Scott had shown me for years that when Lauren needed something, he viewed our family's resources as flexible. At first, the resource was his time. Then it was my time. Then it was our plans. Eventually, it became our money, our home, and my legal identity. Large betrayals often begin with a person learning that small boundaries can be crossed without consequence. I had said, "I don't like this," many times. Scott heard, "Convince me." I had said, "We cannot invest in Lauren's restaurant." He heard, "Not yet." I had said, "Emma's account is untouchable." He heard, "Unless the situation feels important enough to me." After the divorce, I became much more careful with the language of generosity. Scott had called what he did helping. Lauren called it saving 32 jobs. My mother-in-law called it a mistake made for a good reason. But generosity requires ownership. You can give your own time. You can risk your own money. You can sacrifice your own comfort. When you give away another person's safety, another person's identity, or a child's medical reserve without consent, that is not generosity. It is theft, wearing a kind expression. Emma is 14 now. Her heart is strong. She still sees her cardiologist every year, and she will probably need more procedures as an adult. We plan for them together in age-appropriate ways. There is another savings account. It is in a trust with withdrawal rules that require documented medical or educational expenses. No single person, including me, can empty it alone. When Emma turned 13, I showed her how the account worked. I explained the balance, the restrictions, and why 2 approvals were required. She asked, "You don't trust yourself either." "I trust myself today," I said. The rule is for every version of us, including the version that might be scared, pressured, sick, or convinced one exception will be harmless. She considered that. So the rule isn't because everyone is bad. No. It is because important things should not depend on one person always being good at the exact moment a decision becomes difficult. Later, she used part of her birthday money to open her own savings account. She created categories for college, travel, gifts, and something she labeled emergency cake. I asked what qualified as a cake emergency. "I'll know when it happens," she said. For the first time, money connected to that year made both of us laugh. Emma later asked whether she should tell friends what her father had done. I told her the story belonged partly to her, and she could choose when to share it, but she never had to use it as an explanation for who she was. "I don't want people to look at Dad and only see that," she said. "Then you do not have to tell them, but protecting his full humanity is different from protecting him from the facts. You are allowed to remember the father who stayed at the hospital and the father who took the money. Both are true." She said that was complicated. I agreed. Growing up safely did not require a simple villain. It required permission to name a harmful choice without being told that love made the choice disappear. Some people might see that as sad. I see it as structure. Good intentions are not a financial control. Love is not a fraud prevention system. Clear rules protect good people on bad days and vulnerable people from anyone who decides their own reason is more important than consent. Emma once asked why her father and I could not stay married after he paid the money back. I told her, because the money was not the only thing he took. She asked what else. My ability to choose, I said. That was the deepest injury. If Scott had asked me whether we could loan Lauren $84,000 from Emma's account, I would have said no. He knew that. So he removed me from the decision and planned to restore the evidence before I discovered it. He did not want agreement. He wanted the appearance of agreement after the risk had passed. That is not partnership. Healthy love can survive a no. It can survive disappointment, disagreement, and the terrible feeling of watching someone you care about face consequences you cannot prevent. Unhealthy love treats another person's boundary as proof they do not understand enough. For years, Scott believed maturity meant I would eventually understand whatever he had already decided. Now I believe maturity is being able to hear someone say no without taking away their right to say it. The day I opened that bank account, I thought the number on the screen was the entire disaster. It was not. The disaster was a marriage where my competence had become collateral. Scott believed I would solve the housing problem, the insurance problem, the leave problem, and the missing money problem because I had always solved everything before. He was right that I could handle it. I did handle it. I got Emma to surgery. I protected our home. I corrected the loan record. I rebuilt the savings. I kept working. I created a stable co-parenting life. But my ability to survive his decision did not make the decision less harmful. That is something strong people need to remember. Survival is not consent. Recovery is not proof that the damage was acceptable. Forgiveness is not access. And someone finally understanding why you were hurt does not require you to return to the place where they hurt you. The chocolate cake Emma wanted after surgery was not the largest in Ohio. It leaned slightly to one side, and the frosting was too sweet. She loved it. When I think about that year now, I do not picture the bank balance first. I picture Emma laughing with frosting on her nose, her scar healing beneath her dress, surrounded by people who had learned how to show up without asking her to pay for it. We lost money. I lost a marriage. Scott lost the career he had once believed Lauren saved, but Emma did not lose her future. And I did not lose mine. I used to believe keeping a family together meant absorbing whatever threatened to break it. Now I know that sometimes the threat is the rule that one person may decide for everyone else. I did not break our family when I reported the forged signature. I stopped one person from using love as authorization. That was not revenge. It was the first honest financial decision our marriage had made in a long time.